There's a subtle assumption that most of us carry about how the mind works. We tend to think of the mind as something that produces thoughts, that creates attention, that generates emotion, almost like a machine running internally. And most of the time, we don't question that. We just assume that's what the mind is doing. But if you look a little more closely, something doesn't quite fit, because thoughts don't always feel like they're being created. They often feel like they're arriving. Emotions don't show up neatly when we choose them. They come, sometimes without invitation. And attention doesn't always move where we want it to. It gets pulled, sometimes in multiple directions, at the same time. So what if the mind is not just producing? What if it's also receiving? Welcome to the Sea of Signals. I'm Amy Wilson, a psychotherapist. In this podcast, we explore how attention, sensitivity, and overwhelm may make more sense when we understand the mind as something that receives and responds to signal. If you pause for a moment, you can start to notice it. Right now, there are sounds around you, sensations in your body, thoughts moving in and out of awareness, memories, expectations, subtle emotional shifts. There is a constant stream of input moving through you. And most of the time, it stays in the background. But for some people, it doesn't. For some people, the world feels louder. Not just in sound, but in experience. They notice more. They feel more. They pick up on small changes. They track multiple layers at once. And for a long time, these differences have been framed as problems. Too sensitive, too anxious, too distracted, too much. But what if we looked at this differently? What if some minds are simply receiving more signal? Imagine a radio. Some radios are tuned to a narrow frequency. They pick up one clearer station. Everything is simple, focused, contained. Now imagine a radio that receives a much wider range. More information comes in, and so does more noise, more overlap, more complexity. And it becomes harder to isolate one signal at a time. If we apply that to the mind, some people may be operating with a wider bandwidth. They're receiving more sensory input, emotional input, cognitive input, relational input, all at once. And that has both strengths and challenges. On one hand, this can create deep insight, strong intuition, pattern recognition, and creativity. But on the other hand, it can create overwhelm. Because when too much signal is coming in, the system has to work harder to organize it, to filter it, to decide what matters, to decide where to focus. And when that system becomes overloaded, something has to give. Sometimes that looks like distraction, sometimes procrastination, sometimes anxiety, sometimes shutting down. But underneath those behaviors, there may be something else happening. The system is trying to manage more input than it can comfortably process. And this is where something begins to shift. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" we begin asking, "What is my mind receiving right now? How much signal is coming in? What would help reduce the noise? And what would help create clarity?" And those are very different questions. This is the foundation. of sea of signals. The idea that many of the struggles people experience, they may make more sense when we understand the mind as something that receives, filters, and responds to signal. If this resonates with you, you may already know that your mind doesn't filter the world in the same way others seem to. And that difference may not be something to fix, but something to understand. Thank you for listening to The Sea of Signals. If this episode resonated, you can subscribe on Substack for future episodes and essays.